Welcome back to the channel. I'm in Scotland, southwest Scotland, just between Dumfries and Gretna Green, and I've come today to visit the Annandale Distillery, which is in a little hamlet village called Annandale. It is built by George Donald, who was a former excise officer from Banff in Aberdeenshire, and he chose the site to build the distillery as there was pre-existing clearing in the woods and a local water source, which you may be able to hear in the background. It needed that water source to power the water wheel to deal with the distillery process, and it's one of the oldest distilleries in Scotland that's still operating. Very, very old buildings, as you can tell. There's a lot of peat in the area. These are the casks. Try not to get run over. These casks would have come from bourbon whiskey or different other types of oak barrels, etc., which obviously give it the flavour. It's quite a damp and mild climate here, which is why this was chosen as a site to make whiskey. It's been through 2 centuries, lasted nearly 2 centuries, three generations of whiskey owners, with a 90-year hiatus where it was used in porridge production and also for agricultural uses, including the housing of livestock in these old buildings. Now in its 4th era of whiskey production under its current stewardship of Professor David Thompson and Teresa Church, who, after an extensive restoration of safeguarded Annandale Distillery for generations to come. This is the old buildings. The flowing deck. Kiln, chimney. Good morning, back at the Annandale Distillery to do their distillery tour today, and I've just got my things that I need, which includes tasting notes, although I should be mindful that I'm driving, so I won't be tasting anything today, but I will get some takeaway options to take with me. You also get a blue and black pen, which is made of cardboard with plastic inserts, and this lanyard, if you can see it around my neck, which has a Annandale tasting thing on it.
So, very warm welcome to Annandale. Yeah, it's nice to meet you all. I'm Joe. I'm going to show you around, and before we do anything else, I'm going to pour a little bit of whiskey. We've got health and safety stuff to talk about. I think you can do that while we're having a little drop. So for those of you who are drinking, this is our Storyman blended whiskey. Actually, it's the only blend that we make here. It is a combination of bourbon casks, red wine casks for both single malts, but it does have a little bit of grain and water in as well. So it's a premium blend, and you probably recognise the smile on the front. This is James Cosmo, a friend of the distillery. He came here and got on very well with the owner, and he said, I've always wanted to make a whiskey, so of course we made it happen. So it took 3 years, but so these are his choices. He was involved in the tasting process to come up with the blend, and the idea was it's something easy for him to pour for his friends and not overly complicated. Yeah. So just something to drink. So it's a good starting day. There's a little bit of peated whiskey in there, so there's about 8% peated. So there's a little bit of pepper in the finish, a little bit of warmth, but largely it's vanilla and honey. You driving? Yeah. If you're driving, I'm sorry, I can't. Yeah. It's 0 in Scotland. I'm sorry. Yeah, the limit is very, very low here. So, but you get your hands to take away. Okay. And this gentleman's driving as well, so. Yeah. Oh, that's tough on drivers.
What's the percentage
So it is 46%, so it's hand water added. It's, most of our whiskies are actually cask strength, single casks, single malts. So this is the exception to the rule. So yeah, nice one to start with. How are you finding it? Something different?
Yeah.
It's quite smooth, quite sweet. In some ways it's quite classic Annandale, kind of sweetness and vanilla. Anyway, so I'm going to tell you a little bit about the history here. So there's been a distillery on this spot since 1836. Originally, obviously they came here because we have water running through the site. We have peat 3 miles up the road. Peat bogs in the south of Scotland, so it's not maybe what you would expect, but we do have peat 3 miles up the road. Very important for making whiskey. And there would have been local barley as well, because we're in this Annan River Valley, the Annandale. It's a very fertile land, so everything they needed to make whiskey. And this is not long after the change in the Excise Act, which made it more affordable, cheaper to pay the taxes and legally distill whiskey. Because you know, before that time there was a lot of people hiding behind mountains in the Highlands, making whiskey and not paying their taxes. And this is part of the story because the man who set up Annandale Distillery was a former taxman. He had spent his life collecting taxes from the whiskey makers, and then when the change in the law happened, he said, let's get into business. So 100%. He was called George Donald. It was with money from local businessmen. They all paid in to this distillery. They all had something to gain, whiskey. And the Donald family ran the distillery for nearly 50 years. Wife Margaret, she operated the stills, and the 12 children worked here as well. Busy family.
Busy man,
yeah. No TV in those days. What are you going to do? So at the end of that time, basically George Donald died, and the family sold it. So they sold to a wine and spirits merchant from Liverpool by the name of John Sykes Gardner, and him and his son put in lots of money into this place. He was a wealthy businessman. He upgraded the old water wheel. He added a steam engine, so that was very modern for that period. And they invested in livestock for the farm, so cows, and in the buildings as well. But the untimely death of the son meant that John Sykes Gardner sold up, and in 1893 it was the Johnnie Walker company who bought the Annandale Distillery. So Annandale whiskey from that time would have gone in the famous black label, red label blends of Johnnie Walker. Johnnie Walker was doing really big business at that time. They'd moved into these markets in Europe because there was the phylloxera bug eating the grapevines of Europe, so there was a shortage of wine, there was a shortage of brandy in France, and the Scottish entrepreneurs stepped into these markets and sold Scotch whisky. So this is blended Scotch whisky because in 1830 the continuous stills were developed, so we had cheap grain whisky, and they were mixing it with single malts. So they needed small distilleries to supply those single malt whiskies, and that's what Annandale were making then, a peated single malt. It would have gone on the train to Kilmarnock, where Johnnie Walker was based, and then sold around the world. So it might not have been the best whiskey by my personal taste, but they did a really good job creating a global awareness of whiskey and a market for Scotch. So the Johnnie Walker company, they put in this Doig ventilator, the pagoda roof you might have seen from outside, an original Doig ventilator, and they also put in the large chimney there. These are all from the late 1890s, 1896 we think, the ventilator. They ran this place until the end of the First World War, but in 1918 they stopped production here. It was a few things. It was a bad economic climate for the young distilleries, the small distilleries. The war was rationing grains, so barley was rationed. The workers were all busy with the war effort, and also there was the immature spirits. Peated whiskey, we make both, but we don't do the peating here, or the malting of the barley. So we get 30 tons per week delivered to us. This is our unpeated barley. Doesn't smell very much. This is, maybe animal food or hamster cages, some people say. And this one is our peated barley at 45 parts per million. So there is a substantial peat in there. And I'm getting nose blind to it now, but there is a smoky aroma that comes with the peated barley. This happens for us by the Crisp Malting Group up in the Highlands. That's who does our thank you very much. They do our malting and the peating of the barley. And it gets delivered to us in 30-ton lorry loads, dropped into a hatch in the yard. It goes into our mill room, which is behind this wall. It goes through a destoning process. Thank you very much. We check it for moisture, because if it's too wet, it will spoil. Barley water that we've drained off, that we call wort, goes into one of the the washbacks, whichever one we're using that day. We haven't got all of the sugars out of the grain yet, so there's a second batch of water comes in through the ring at the top here, which is a sparge ring. It sprinkles in quite gently. We don't want to disturb the mixture too much because they're all at different stages of burning. Okay, this one's very ripe. So this is the ones to look at. Let me get this step for you. Okay, this one's even more so. Alright. Yeah, okay. So at this point in our production, we're quite far along with these fermenting. They're very nearly there. This one's probably ready to go to the stills. So it's pretty sticky.
How long?
So the minimum is 66 hours. Sometimes it runs on longer than that. It depends on our schedule. Yeah, it basically is completely spent, and it ends up being a wash of about 8% alcohol. In the middle of fermentation, the bottom part of an Oregon pine tree has no branches, which means we get these long bits of wood with no knots in it. They would be a weakness. With all the pressure of all this volume of liquid pushing down, they would seep, they would pop out. So that's the reason we use Oregon pine. And they were built in situ because they're so big. They were built here around the scaffold, and then they were filled with water so that the wood would expand and seal shut. So that's how they were made. The mash tun came in through the roof. They had to deconstruct the roof. And the stills came in as a very big door on the side. So they came in sections through the and they were welded in place. So, yeah, they were built in sections and they were joined in the middle, in the actual place. Okay? So we'll go up and we'll have a look at the stills. Yeah, I'll get that one on the way. It's very helpful. Firstly, we send the wash through the big still on the left. This is our wash still. If you look down, you'll see it's mounted a lot lower down. This is a big volume still. It takes the whole wash. This one goes up to 100 degrees, but we aim for about 94, 96. Because the wash is only 8% alcohol, we need a little bit more heat to get it moving. The vapours rise up, they condense down the line arm, and outside there is a condenser. And what returns through this safe, the wash safe, we call the low wines. And this averages between 22 and 24% alcohol. But we don't want to drink low wines. It's got methanol in it still. It's still got some flavours we don't like. But that's collected here and goes to the big tank underneath, which is our low wines and feints receiver. On the next production cycle, that volume of low wines is split between the two spirits stills. They run side by side at the same time. And the reason we've got two is two smaller volume stills gives you a lot more surface area of copper per unit of liquid. So we're getting much more copper contact with our two small stills than we would with one big one. The copper does some important jobs. It removes sulfur, forms copper sulfate, which we then remove out of the still at the end. So we remove the sulfur out of the whiskey. It also helps move these compounds that become esters, fruity esters. So it's catalyzing reactions which help. So everything about the design is about more contact, including the bubble in the middle, to create a vortex with the vapors going down and down. And ideally we want the vapors to rise and fall a number of times before they come out of the line for that reflux action. And they come out of the line, condense outside, and return to the spirits. Including the spirit. But they're set now, and we don't mess with them. This is decisions made above our heads, you know. Now we owe quite a lot to a man called Dr. Jim Swan, who's a real whiskey guru for production. He's actually not with us any longer, but he helped David. This is him on the left here, with David Thompson, our owner, on the right. This is the first time they tasted our new make spirit. And Jim Swan was the man who suggested we have two stills. He said, basically, you're going to need two stills to make the fruity whiskey you want to make. David has a background as a sensory scientist and his wife, Teresa Church, so they have a global marketing company where they do food and drink flavour profiling. So they really understand a lot about the sensory response to food and drink. So David had come up with an ideal whiskey that he wanted to make. There was a gap in the market. It was very sweet, fruity and floral. And Jim Swan told him how to do it. So we owe a lot to Jim Swan. He was really helpful. And at this moment, Jim says, yeah, it tastes good. And David said, because by now he's perhaps spent 15 million on the place. So, a lot of relief for David, but it met Jim's approval. So yeah, that's what that picture is all about. Now, because these stills, they give up some copper, they erode during the process. They do get thinner. We have to check that every year. Eventually, we will have to replace them. We think we should get 30 to 40 years without any replacements, but they're 10 years old already. And the waiting time to get a new still is 6 years.
6 years?
Yeah. Forsyths at the moment are doing the Macallan refit. They are making 30 stills at the moment for Macallan alone. So they're very busy. They are the best, so yeah.
So theoretically, you have to order them 4 years after you get one.
Yeah, I mean, we think they're going to tell us when to reorder because they actually come and do the testing of the still. So they probably give us a heads up. But yeah, a 6-year waiting list. We're definitely going to be thinking ahead.
It's good business, 6 years.
And the more the store is open, so probably the demand is
And
even...
the stills the same size appeared and brought it in the distillery there. So that's probably what happened to them. We don't know for sure. The reason it's low down is they would have gravity fed water from the river down here to turn into steam to run the stills. So yeah, we're very happy about this. Glasgow University uncovered all this, excavated it, and we now have this window on the past. So come and give it a cuddle and take a photograph. Bring a birthday cake.
I read on the website it's 18 bottles a year.
So there's another way of doing it. So if you buy a cask outright, you have to wait until you bottle it. But you can also buy into portfolio casks where you get bottles every year. It's like a syndicate.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's another way of doing it. So you come in. just been filling one here. They've got big warehouses set up that are just seasoning casks for the whiskey industry. Now the sherry doesn't even get drunk, it does several casks and then it goes to be vinegar.